You paying your bills is kind of like, that's just like the baseline. Just because the bills are paid doesn't mean that like you're financially healthy. It just means like things aren't falling apart actively right now.
When you're running that close to the edge and then something happens, then you're really kind of screwed.
You're not safe until you have an emergency fund, until your finances are in order.
But if there's anything we've learned over the past, 2 to 3 years, layoffs can happen, and they do happen at a massive scale.
What can you do when your budget's been completely blown, you're stuck in survival mode, and there's nothing left to cut? Welcome back to the show, everyone. Lauren and I are back for our weekly episode where we talk all things money, from getting out of debt, budgeting, investing, and all the other crazy things going on in the world of finance. Now, Lauren, I was talking to someone the other day, and they were telling me about how, for the longest time, they felt like their finances were just kind of running smoothly. They were just cruising along. And then all of a sudden, it felt like everything just went to shit. Between getting laid off, a car repair, a medical bill, it just felt like they suddenly went from feeling like things were good to now feeling like they're completely underwater, and that things were just spiraling faster than they could play catch up with it. And, I kind of wanted to ask you, do you think people underestimate how close they are to kind of falling over the edge? I don't know. It seems like a lot of people are in that place where they're just one unexpected bill or expense coming up from not being able to afford rent. Do you think people don't realize how fragile their finances are until something breaks?
We've talked about this before, about how people think it can't happen to them. You know what I mean? We just have this. I think all of us have it in a sense, it's not going to happen to me. Whatever the situation is, money or something completely different. We just have this optimism that we're going to be the one that it doesn't happen to. Right. And then also what you were saying is so many things happen. It always happens all at once, I feel like whenever something goes wrong, it just feels like everything else then just starts falling downhill after that. And especially with your money, then it's hard to get back on track,
Yeah, it really does just feel like there's so many people out there who, like you said, they don't think it can happen to them. And so they just cruise along with things being right next to the edge. And then it literally just takes one bad week for things to all fall apart. And then they're stuck in that mode where it's I don't know what I can do anymore. Everything feels like it's spiraling after that point.
Yeah.
And they maybe didn't take the set up the proper safety nets or have the right precautions in place to deal with it. And now it's just one disaster after another,
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I don't know. And we've talked about this before too, but a lot of people are just living kind of mindlessly about their money. They're not paying attention to it. And when you're not paying attention, you don't have all of your emergency funds or things set up or a plan to how something how an emergency is going to happen or when emergency is going to happen. That's whenever things can get out of control so quickly. And it, like I said, it always spirals. It's never just one thing. And then you can recover from it and come back. It's always a ton of little things, even if it's big things or little things, whatever, it always seems to come in multiples. And then it really seems to, really drag people down financially. And then they sort of stay there for a long time because they just can't get their head above water.
Yeah. And I almost feel like part of the issue too is that people, I don't think people have a clear understanding of what it means to be financially healthy. I feel like for a lot of people, it's oh, I'm paying my bills. Things are good. Everything's getting paid month after month. Things aren't that bad, and it doesn't, they're not connecting the dots that hey, you paying your bills is kind of that's just the baseline, to just surviving. All the bills are paid. Cool. But are you setting aside money for an emergency fund? Are you building up past that to build up your savings, to start investing? Just because the bills are paid doesn't mean that you're financially healthy. It just means things aren't falling apart actively right now.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, people living the paycheck to paycheck, it's not always, sometimes it's not always living paycheck to paycheck, just paying your bills. It's living paycheck to paycheck to afford your current lifestyle, whether that's, eating out or, buying clothes and stuff. You're still able to pay your bills each month and afford those things. But when you're running that close to the edge and then something happens, then you're really kind of screwed. You know what I mean? So it just seems like that's the problem. If you're running that close there, and there's some sort of emergency, which it will happen, that's whenever you can get yourself in some real trouble.
Oh, 100%. And I almost feel like people don't understand fully what it means to be paycheck to paycheck. Like,
No.
I feel like a lot of people have this idea in their head, like, oh, paycheck to paycheck means like you're broke, you know? And it's like, no, it literally means like, if you don't get paid next month,
Yeah.
are you going to be okay? And if you're not, like, that's literally the definition of living paycheck to paycheck. Like, if you don't have a paycheck coming in next month, does all of your financial life just fall apart? And that's like indication that like you don't have the other parts of your finances built up to weather some kind of storm, or to weather like if things in the economy are going bad. It's like, if you are 100% reliant on like that check clearing, whether it's next week or next month, like you're not in a really solid position, because it can literally be something completely out of your control. It can be a bad day at work. It could be whatever. Like, there's so many different things that can go wrong to where now you don't get that paycheck, everything's starting to fall apart. You know, like if you're in that position, like that's, regardless of how much you're making, like to me, that's living the paycheck to paycheck life.
Yeah. So you just said paycheck to paycheck doesn't mean you're broke, or it just means you're broke. What do you mean by that?
Well, like I feel like some people think like, oh, like I'm not broke, and so therefore I'm not living paycheck to paycheck, you know?
Right.
They're like, I can still afford to do good things. Like my lifestyle feels good, you know? And to me, it's like, whether you're making $150,000 a year or $30,000 a year, to me, like the definition is what's going to happen to your finances, to your life, to where you live, if you're even your car, right? Like what's going to happen if that paycheck doesn't come through next month, you know? Like it doesn't just mean that you make a low income and you're relying on the paycheck. It's like, no, it literally, in my mind, means that if that money doesn't come through, like you're screwed next month.
Yeah, that made me think about when we talk about how people will kind of take anything on their plate if they can afford the monthly payment. That's exactly what that made me think of, because you feel like, oh, I can afford it monthly. But then, like you said, if something were to go awry, like you suddenly cannot afford all of these payments that you've signed up for, you know?
Oh, 100%. And like, I think that's kind of like where the difference comes in of like budgeting to get ahead versus like budgeting kind of like just to survive, you know? Like I feel like those two things are very different. And I feel like a lot of people are in this mode of like, well, like the bills are paid, I can afford everything going on in my lifestyle as long as the paycheck comes through. And they're kind of in that mode of like, I'm just, but like the way I'm budgeting, even if they're not writing things down on paper, is like just purely survival at that point, you know? Like whereas budgeting to get ahead is more of like, okay, like I know I could afford to do all these things, but I'm going to choose not to, and I'm going to put that money towards building up like the safety nets around me, whether that's an emergency fund or starting to invest for retirement or saving to like buy a home or pay for your next car in cash, right? Like, I don't know. Do you see a difference between those two types of budgeting?
Oh yeah. And I often wonder like, what, I guess like if you're just budgeting to survive, like, are you actually budgeting? You know what I mean? I mean, I guess you could, but you're just like maxing out all of your spend categories. You know what I mean? But I feel like budgeting to get ahead would mean that you're like set, you know, specifically taking money down from some spending that you do. Like, let's say you take it down from your like eating out fund or whatever, and you put it in like your emergency fund. That would be the difference for me of like trying to get ahead rather than just like survive and live your life month to month. I don't know. That's just what it feels like for me.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I love that you talked about it like that, like taking from the parts of the budget that don't matter as much to fund the parts that do. Yep. And like, this is kind of like a side note for sure, but like I was reading this post about this guy who was looking to buy a home, and he was like, I know like the rule is like 30% needs to go towards my house, like at most 30% towards my housing so I can afford to do the other things. But like, we're coming in at like 35%. Is this a bad idea? And like, it's like, if you're willing to make that sacrifice of 5%, as long as you're pulling that from the right area in your budget, like that's totally going to be okay. You know, like, and I've said this before in the past, like, yeah, the 30% rule, like it's there to make sure you can afford the other things in life. But like, if you were to look at like for example, like a 50, 30, 20 budget, you know, 30% is going towards those wants, right? In a traditional 50, 30, 20, like, can you pull from that 30% to fund the 50%, you know what I'm saying? Like if your housing does take up more of your monthly budget, as long as that's not coming out of like your ability to save or build up your retirement, and it's instead coming out of like your lifestyle fund or you're dining out, or maybe you have to go to a cheaper gym, you know, like I'm totally okay with that as long as you're aware of that sacrifice. It's just not okay when it's like, no, my housing's 40% and now I can't save any money or put any money towards future repairs or things like that, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And the budgeting, you know, to get ahead made me think of, I always refer back to this, but my debt-free journey. Like I planned out my budget so strategically and like did not even go close to like a restaurant Unless someone else was treating me, I didn't go. And I also didn't like buy clothing during that time or anything miscellaneous. I think my miscellaneous back then, now it's like a couple hundred a month just because like, things happen or whatever. Back then it was like very strictly like 50 to $100. Everything else was going towards my debt. So that was like very strategic on my part to like get ahead because I knew I wanted to pay off that debt. So in the future, I didn't have to just survive,
It's almost funny to see the reactions from people who like, they're like, I want to get out of debt. And you're like, cool. Like, do you really want to get out of debt? They're like, yeah, like this is crushing me. And it's like, all right, cut out these things. And they're like, but what about like enjoying life?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean I can't go out and eat? It's like, it's not that you can't. It's just when you look back at your spending at the end of the month, do you want to be able to say that I put all my money and effort towards getting out of debt? Or do you want to say like, I went a little bit slower and this is taking me an extra year or two because, I wanted to make sure I could still do things that I'm probably not going to remember down the road. It's not like you're missing out on life experiences. We're talking about the difference between cooking at home and going out and eat, like going out to eat. Like these aren't like life-changing decisions we're asking you to make, No,
yeah. And I think for me, would I tell people to do exactly what I did? I don't think so. I think you and I, Nick, are like different people. Like we're disciplined to do that type of thing, like cut everything out of our life and just like kind of not suffer. I wasn't suffering. I still had friends and a good life, but I think there's people out there that do need to be a little bit more, lenient with the money, like, maybe plan in some, coffee trips or plan in some times where you can eat out throughout the month and maybe just take a few extra months to pay off your debt. Because otherwise I feel like if you just like pull back too far, then you just like fling into the other direction and then just like it all goes to shit, So I don't know. That's kind of my take on it now that I've been through this process. Like it's hard and I did it and I was extremely disciplined, but would I do it again? I don't know.
No, that's a really good point. And like one time when I was helping someone like get onto their debt payoff journey, they were like, well, I think it's really important that I keep my gym membership and like my Netflix membership. And I was like, okay, like walk me through that. Like, this is at the end of the day, it's got to be your personal finances, And they're like, well, if I have something to where it's going to take up all of my free time, like being at the gym or being able to watch my favorite shows, that's going to prevent me from wanting to go out or wanting to put myself in these other places that are going to have me spend more money. I'm like, that's a total legit reason right there. Like if you're saying like my $50 per month membership and then my $10 Netflix, like that's $60 a month. That's not a deal breaker right there. If that's going to prevent you from spending like $300, $400, $500 because now your time is literally taken up, like that makes total sense right there. And that's a trade-off like I love to see because you can back it up with like saying this is actually a smart choice,
Yeah, for sure.
I think this whole conversation kind of leads us to the question of like, and you kind of mentioned it, like when your finances go to shit, like what do you do? Like, what are the next steps? And so I came across this question where someone was kind of dealing with a similar situation. And so this person wrote, I finally landed my first job and now I'm getting laid off. I recently finished grad school and landed a great job. It was a tough process that took 6 months of applying and interviewing, but all the work looked like it was finally paying off. The job required me to relocate, so I spent all the money I managed to save during grad school to move to the area. At the end of my first week, I was informed that due to federal funding cuts, my job will be the first to get cut, and this is my 2 months' notice. I'm feeling hopeless and devastated as my finances were finally starting to look good after about 10 years of scraping by in school. To make things worse, my student loan grace period is about to end. What options do I have?
This is so terrible. And I feel like when employers have someone like relocate and then lay them off like 2 days later, that is, I don't know. I don't like that. It's very, I don't know. I've been laid off before. It's not a good feeling. It's very scary to know that like soon you're not going to have a paycheck coming in. But this person especially, like they just got out of school. So who knows really what kind of, what their finances look like. Do they have any type of emergency fund and their student loans about, grace period's about to end? Of course, there's always the first thing I think of, of course their student loan grace period is ending, but there's always deferment because of job loss, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you do when you're laid off if you don't have any other options? Probably go and try to find another job. If you just got out of grad school, I'm guessing you have a little bit more flexibility with where you can look for work. I don't know. I just feel like a lot of times, like when in these situations, like it is super scary, especially because if the person doesn't have, doesn't have like an emergency fund or anything, there's a lot that could go wrong. But I mean, the first things first, you have 2 months notice. That's a lot. So for me, I'm not going to freak out yet in this situation. Like I'm going to continue about my life. I'm probably going to like tighten things up and not any type of like discretionary spending. I'm going to save as much as I can over these next 2 months. And I'm also going to be on LinkedIn every single day applying for jobs like immediately. So I think this question's a little bit different. Like if this person said in 2 weeks they're done, like it'd be a little bit different for me. But for 2 months, I'm riding it out, saving as much money as possible, and also literally applying to every single job that I can.
Yeah, I think a 2 months notice is pretty generous. You know, most people, you know, especially with recent layoffs, are being told like, hey, by the end of today, we need you gone. Or like you said, at best, it's like a 2 week period. And so to say 2 months, I think that gives you so much runway to plan ahead for this. But yeah, like you said, buttoning down, what is that saying? Like buttoning down the hatches. I think you really got to get clear. It's a saying, I promise. I think you really got to get clear on what all the numbers look like. You know, if you're moving to a new area, is this a higher cost of living area, lower cost of living area? Like, can you potentially move into a cheaper place? I'm sure you just signed a lease, but yeah, I think really looking at what I always like to call like your baseline budget number, like what do you absolutely need to bring in to make sure that you can put food on the table, that you can get to and from work, that your housing's covered, your lights stay on. Like, I think you really got to understand all the numbers to know, all right, when it comes down to this, like in 2 months, if I don't have another job lined up, how much do I need to be bringing in at a minimum just to get by?
Yeah, for sure. Now, like I said, my answer is different between like 2 months and 2 weeks. But let's say, you know, this person is like at a 2 weeks, which is crazy. If they were to relocate this person and then at the end of their first week, they say you're done in 2 weeks, that's crazy. But at that point, I feel like things are really rough. Like you're probably going to have to get several side hustles, attempt to break your lease if you can, and just let them know like you're not going to have a job and potentially have to move back home or wherever, you know, whatever that looks like for you. Things are going to look a little different at that point. But, you know, for right now, I'm definitely going to try to like you said, keep a baseline budget, really just like tighten things up. And I'm not doing anything outside of being in my house applying for jobs at this point. But I don't know. I think this person has more, they're hopeless, devastated, whatever, but I feel like they have a lot more. There's a lot of good things that I think could come from this. Maybe this wasn't the right job for them and the other job is just around the corner. I truly believe in stuff like that. Like I said, I've been laid off. It was not fun and I didn't get a notice at all. I woke up and yeah, it was a bad time in my life. I woke up and I just had lost access to my computer. And then they paid us for the next 2 weeks and we were on our way from that point. So yeah, I definitely know what this is like.
Yeah, that's a pretty rough send off for sure. I don't know. I like when I was reading this, like an idea popped in my head and I was like, is this kind of like a crazy idea or not? Like, I'm a big believer in like, you know, like the free market. Like I think companies need to do what's going to be best for the market to provide the best possible value. But at the same time, like I feel like especially in cases like this where you're asking someone to relocate, like most jobs I would say have like a 6 month like probationary period where they can kind of assess you, make sure that you can do the job adequately. But I feel like that almost needs to go both ways too, where it's like, hey, you can't ask me to move halfway across the country or relocate cities, sign a new lease, and then just let me go, you know, 2 weeks or a month later. Like, you know, barring you not being able to perform the job well or you being like a total asshole, I feel like the job should also be able to make a commitment that says, hey, we've set aside like in our budget the funds to pay you for at least 6 months while we test you out as well. And you know, there's a fine line there that I think could make this not an ideal situation where people could take advantage of it. But like, you know, I feel like it has to go both ways. That level of trust, it's where you're saying, hey, I'm going to allow you to assess if I'm a good fit for your company, but you also got to give me like the comfort of knowing like, hey, for the next 6 months, like I'm employed, I'm good, you know, and then we reevaluate at the end of those 6 months. But yeah, this is just such a shitty situation. And I feel like when someone hears this, like the very first thing they got to do is just get all their numbers in order. Yeah. You know, like I said, like really get clear on what that baseline budget number is and know that, all right, when I lose this job, if there's not something lined up, like whether it's through picking up like a part-time job or like you said, side hustles or DoorDash, whatever it is, like this is the number I have to hit. And you're just focused on getting by right now until you can land another job. I feel like that's really like the only approach they can take. Yeah,
for sure. And I feel like, you know, if we're talking about this person right now who's, you know, pretty fresh on the scene here, how can we, you know, help other people in the future to not be in this situation? I feel, you know, whenever you're just starting and we've learned this, you know, you're starting your career, you don't think this is going to happen to you. Again, another one of those situations where it can happen to me, right? But if there's anything we've learned over the past, like 2 to 3 years, layoffs can happen, and they do happen at a massive scale, you know? So I think the biggest thing is knowing that you're not immune to this. I don't care how big your jobs are. Big tech saw a big uptick in layoffs over the past few years for sure. So I think the biggest thing is to be prepared for this, you know. Don't kind of have your head in the sand and think I have a stable job that I don't really need to prepare for this type of thing for. I didn't know my layoff was coming, but I was very scared because it was in big tech. And so I had been kind of stuffing more money aside. We already had our emergency fund and stuff, but I actually put more money aside than I probably needed to. And then whenever I did get laid off, like, yes, it really hurt, but I knew that I was okay, you know, at least for the next several months until I could find another job. Thank goodness I was only off for like 7 weeks without pay until I found a new job. But that's kind of what I did. Just like if you are in kind of an industry like that, otherwise just have your normal emergency fund there just so you can fall back on it. And you're not in this situation where you're like, student loans are coming, you know, I just moved here and I am terrified of what's going to happen to me, you know?
Oh, 100%. That level of planning ahead is so critical. And like, even when my wife and I, when we moved from California to Texas, like that was a big risk as well, like financially. And so we had to really be clear, like, all right, one, we're moving at the timeline that you can get employed by. Like for my wife, you know, she had a job lined up for when we moved. 2 weeks later, she had her first day. That was a critical part of it. But then also, like you said, just having those backup funds to be able to reassure yourself, hey, if you were to get let go from this job in a month or 2 months or 3 months, like we have enough cash to be able to, you know, and this might be stretching the budget a little bit, but to last us 6 months to a year, just to give you that peace of mind, that flexibility to say, all right, I can take the time to look for another job, worst case, you know? And I think you got to really put it to yourself to like plan ahead like that. You got to put it to yourself to say like, hey, part of this is also on me as well. You know, like we talked a lot about it in one of our last episodes where it's like, you also have to take accountability for your situation and the range of outcomes that could present themselves. You know, like you got to be aware of what could happen. And if you're not planning ahead for those, like part of the responsibility is on you as well.
Absolutely. And I feel like this relates back to what we were just talking about at the beginning of the episode, when people are living paycheck to paycheck, just kind of living their lifestyle, but they're not, you know, budgeting to get ahead or anything like that, because this is the kind of stuff that's going to completely like just ruin you financially if you're not ready for it. You know, let's say I was living paycheck to paycheck when I got laid off and then I was off work for 7 weeks. Like that's scary. You know, if I didn't have any funds like that, I probably would have had to live off credit cards, you know, because we still had our house payment, we still had bills and you had to eat, right? You know, so I think that's the big thing too. Like you said, getting prepared, and there's some sort of, you know, accountability on your end, like to be able to, you know, set some of these things aside and realize that something like this could happen to you in the future, and just being prepared for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're not safe until you have an emergency fund, until your finances are in order. Like you really got to be planning ahead. And like for people who are listening to this and like, what can I take away from this is like, if you're not in this situation where you're about to be laid off in 2 weeks, or you're not living, you know, paycheck to paycheck by whatever terms you think that means to you, like, do you have the flexibility in your budget to be setting aside money, to be building up the savings, to make sure that there's layers of like financial security to fall back on? You know, like maybe layer one is like, all right, I have some extra cash set aside. Layer two is like, I built up that fully funded emergency fund. Okay, worst case, if this was a disaster situation, like I could pull the money that's in my Roth IRA, you know, like you have these layers before you end up on the street, basically is what I'm saying, right? You have all these layers to protect you for what you could do if you were in a disaster situation where you had all of these expenses and you suddenly lose your job. All right, taking a quick break from today's episode, Lauren and I have some exciting news we'd like to share with you. If you're feeling stuck with your finances and don't know where to start, we have you covered with our one-on-one financial coaching.
These are no strings attached coaching sessions that you can sign up for today. No ongoing commitment. You simply book a session whenever you need one.
Each call is 90 minutes, and by the end of it, you'll have a clear budget to work with and a solid plan to start paying off your debt. Plus, we'll make sure you walk away with some awesome tools to keep you on track, including our budget dashboard and expense tracker, as well as our debt payoff optimizer.
And the best part, you'll get to work with both of us on the call. Together, we'll help you develop the best possible strategy forward, answer your questions, and make sure you feel confident about managing your money.
So if you're ready to get a handle on your budget and kickstart your financial journey forward, check out the link in the show notes to book your first session.
We can't wait to get started with you. Now, back to the episode.
I think like kind of switching gears a little bit, like I think a lot of people, they're probably not finding themselves in this situation where they're like, all right, I'm being laid off next week. Like, what do I do? They're probably not sitting here watching a podcast on YouTube. And so like, I guess the better question is like, you might find yourself in the situation where like, you're kind of living that paycheck to paycheck life, you know, like the money hits your account and it's got to service all the different bills and expenses that you have. Like, what do you do in that scenario when a larger expense pops up that you just weren't planning for, you know? And I know we've talked a lot about like planning ahead, but like, this is kind of a different situation because now it's like, I'm not losing my income, but there is this large expense. Like, what do I do? Do I put it on a credit card? Like, how do I deal with that? Like, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of people find themselves in this situation. And I think the natural reaction is, can I get a loan? Can I get a credit card? Can I do like a payment plan? Those are like the three things that I feel like are the first like thought that comes across your mind whenever you do get yourself into a situation like this. And I get it. It's scary. You don't want to be in a situation where you can't afford something. I think we need to like, dive a little bit deeper. Can we adjust our lifestyle a little bit to make this, to take over this expense, right? So let's say you're eating out, again, a lot of people don't pay attention to what they're doing. You're going to have to dive in a little bit. Take the money out of your, no restaurants, no miscellaneous expenses, nothing in there, and see if you can get a little bit creative to cover this big expense. I'm also a fan of like selling shit. You know what I mean? Like if you have to, sell something, take on like extra work, do like freelancing side gigs, whatever, if it's not like an immediate, like need it today. Right. I don't know. I think people are more inclined to just, well, I'll just put it on payment plan or I'll just put it on this credit card. I think you can get a little bit creative with it, but that does take you out of your comfort zone, because I think it increases your vulnerability whenever you're like, okay, what can I sell, to pay for this big expense, or how can I make extra money, or what can I take out of my current budget to actually be able to pay for this? So that's kind of where my head goes. Do you think a lot of people just like lean on like loans and stuff in situations like this?
100%. I think what you said is spot on. Like, I think people don't want to look for, and we've said this before too, like people don't want to look at the harder decision in front of them. They want to look at the easier decision. But like, I don't, it's very rare when I'm talking to someone and looking at their finances and they tell me like, there's just no room to cut. Like, it's very rare that that's the case, and there's degrees to that. Maybe like there's room to cut $100 to $200. It's like, all right, that's still flexibility. And then maybe there's room to cut like $500 to $1,000, but like, like I said, it's really rare that people are completely maxed out. They are accounting for every single little expense. It's like, yeah, I do that in general. And maybe it's like 80% of the time, like, all right, 20% of the time you're just buying shit that you don't need. Yeah. And that could be the flexibility to avoid taking on debt or taking on as much debt to get through a situation like this. Like, and again, it comes back to that thing that you said in the beginning, like people just don't think this is going to happen to them until it does. And they're not prepared for it. I always love that saying is like, hope for the best and plan for the worst, like plan for things to go to shit. And when they don't, you're just going to be pleasantly surprised. But if they do, like, it's not going to be as big of a sweat, Yeah,
I think you're right. I think based on what I've seen too, I hear a lot of people are just like, I can just not make it. It's just, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. Like I can't barely pay my bills. And yes, there's some people out there like that, but I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people out there that just have unrealistic expectations or just don't want to change their lifestyle. You know what I mean? But I think there's some wiggle room in your current finances where you could make some things happen. Now, have I worked with people that literally their bills are just being covered by their single income? Yeah. Or they have kids that's in an activity and they're like, I can't pull my kids out of this activity. You know what I mean? Because that's the only thing they do. Right. So I do know that there's people that are living paycheck to paycheck for real. But I think you're right. I think a lot of people could wiggle some things if they had to. I did that a lot during my debt-free journey. Because it was so like, I was so rigid with it and like every extra dollar I had went to debt. If I had something that popped up, I can't even think of anything that popped up, but definitely things popped up in my process of going through it. I would actually just have to like reduce like what I was paying towards debt that month and use some of that money to take care of the big expense that popped up. Because at that time, my emergency fund was very small and I didn't want to touch it because if a random expense popped up, I would just take some money out of my debt and knew that I wasn't going to be able to pay whatever 60, 70% of my income going towards it. So yeah, I think that, a little flexibility goes a long way.
Yeah, no, and what you were saying at the beginning, I think that that's absolutely true, right? Like there's a lot of people who really are stuck in this position. And it's also not to say that like things aren't as expensive as people are saying. Like, no, things are expensive. Like housing prices have gone up,
Yep.
the price of getting a vehicle if you need to, like the price of groceries, gas, like a lot of things around like your daily expenses have just increased in price. And it's not to say that like things aren't more expensive and things aren't harder, like they are, but that's even more reason why you got to like double down and look at your spending. Because even if it's like $200 a month that you can free up, like assuming something doesn't go wrong for 5 months, like cool, now you got $1,000, like how long can you keep rolling that forward and building up that savings to get there? But yeah, what you said about like when you're kind of working that debt payoff plan, or you're working like any plan, whether it's like a savings plan, a debt payoff plan, or like an investing plan, like when something comes up, like you got to just be able to adjust your plan a little bit, give yourself that flexibility, because what you don't want is for when something comes up to like set you back even further. You want to just say, all right, let me pause where I'm at today and let me deal with the situation. And then I can always come back to that and click play again,
Yeah. So we talked about, what should people do if there's an expense that pops up? Now, what if they can't adjust their budget for the month? Like, let's say it's like a $3,000 like car repair. That really sucks because like that's not something you're usually prepared for. How would somebody cover this if they didn't have the savings to do so? And they obviously aren't making that much to pay for a $3,000 car repair.
That's a really tough situation. Cause like you gotta kind of take it case by case, because the timeline of when this is coming up is definitely going to play a huge factor. But like, if you're literally like walking out of the mechanic shop and they're like, no, like your bill's $3,000, like the very first question I'd ask them is like, do you have any sort of payment plan for this?
Yeah.
Like, is there a way I can pay this to you over the next 6 months? And part of that might be trying to appeal to like their level of compassion, but if it's another situation where you're like, all right, I know this expense is coming up in the future. Like how much time do I have to plan ahead for that? That's when I think adjusting the numbers, like that's going to be super critical. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really tough if a situation comes up where you need to pay it like today or tomorrow and you don't have any savings. Like at that point, like the poor planning has really caught up to you, and there's almost no other option other than to take on debt.
Yeah. And sometimes in these car situations or any situation, like, is it something that needs to be fixed like today before I can leave? Or do you think I can make it through like till summer or something, and be able to save up for it before then? So those are the things I always like to ask first. Like, or did they already do the repair and they're like, okay, you owe $3,000, and you're like, wait
That's
a second.
what I was thinking.
You're like, wait a second, I didn't sign up for this. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to ask if they have some sort of payment plan, because this is really scary because, you're not prepared for this kind of stuff. I remember when I was in college, this is like crazy. I was so young, Nick, but when I was in college, I did not have like all of these, I was a college student. I didn't have a huge emergency fund or anything. And I took my car to get an oil change. So I was expecting like $60 to get your oil changed or whatever. And they had told me they said something about doing another like test to the car or whatever. And I was a college student, Nick. I didn't know all this stuff. And I said, okay, that's cool. And then I go up to pay at the desk and they're like, it's $400 and some dollars. And Nick, I started crying. And it was the mechanic because he was coming out to tell me what he fixed. And my tears just welled up in my eyes. And I was like, and he was like, he literally looked at me. He's like, it's okay. He's like, it's okay. We're going to take care of this. I was just like crying like this little girl like in college, just like tearing up. But I feel like, for me, I mean, they helped me out because they didn't really explain it to me that well. So like, whatever. But the first thing I'm going to do is, ask if they have some type of payment plan or whatever to help you pay this. Right. I think that's one of the first things to do. If you have to, I hate credit cards, but if you can find something like a 0%, credit card, that can be a potential good option. I don't love that though, because there's limits on those. So unless you actually get it paid off before that kicks in, before the interest kicked in, that would probably be the only way I would do it. Or like some type of personal loan. I would not put this on like a regular credit card with like 29% interest.
Yeah.
Even if it's like a $3,000 repair, that's a lot,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, $3,000 on a credit card. I was literally just talking to someone who has like this is like $3,900 on a credit card they're trying to pay off.
Yeah.
The monthly payment's like $100, and it's like 16 years
Yes.
if they just make the minimum payment.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Now, they pay a little bit more and it cuts it in half, but like that's still so long to put it on a credit card. Like the zero balance, like if that's that's almost like a last resort option for me, and it's certainly better than just a normal credit card. But like that should hopefully be like your wake up call to say, all right, I have been failing to plan this whole time. Like I got to get ahead of this now. Like I got to make sure that I'm not stuck in a situation like this. And like back to your original question of like, what can you do if you literally need to pay this now? Like it's almost too late at that point. And I hate to say that because a lot of times you with finances, you can say it's not too late for you. Like if you take action now, but in situations like that, it is. And you almost have to take the hit, learn from that. And we talked about this in the last episode, like not letting that define what you do moving forward, but instead seeing it as like, all right, this is a learning moment. I really screwed up and hopefully I never make this mistake again because I'm going to plan better for it. You had mentioned that like when you were working your debt payoff plan in college and like something came up, you kind of had to push pause on that plan and refocus on it. And, it kind of got me thinking like, and I've mentioned this hundreds of times by now, but like my wife and I have been going through the home buying process, and she asked me a question, and at first it like really caught me by surprise because I was like, are you trying to tell me something right now? But it's a question that I kind of wanted to bounce to you, Lauren, and get your take on it. But she asked me like, hey, we're getting ready to buy a home right now. What would change in our plan? Like if I told you I was pregnant today, like how would our finances change? And so I guess, Lauren, for you, like what would you tell someone like me if they were getting ready to buy a home, putting, 20% down on it? Like, how would you tell them to adjust their plan if they had like this huge life expense come in pretty soon?
Someone like you, Nick, I think you've got the funds set aside. I think you guys are going to be okay. You're prepared to buy a house. You have all of your down payments. You have your emergency fund outside of that. I'm sure you have extra cash outside of that as well. I think you're fine. I think people who are well prepared for these types of situations, you're going to continue on and just buy a home. Now, let's say every single cent you have is going to be going into that house. Mm-hmm. Do you want to rethink it a little bit because you're going to have a small human that's coming into the world and you don't know if they're going to have any medical issues or if you're going to have like a rough pregnancy or whatever and not be able to work and bring in income? Like those are all things that you have to think about. But in a situation like yours, I'm not going to change anything I'm doing because, this was the plan and a little human's coming along. And as long as there's a bedroom in there for them, right, Nick?
It's easy to dish out advice. It's so hard for me to take my own advice sometimes because like that makes total sense. It's like, no, like you've planned out the numbers, things make sense on paper. But then when she asked me that question, I'm like, dude, we're canceling the home purchase right now. We're setting this up. We're piling cash up just to make sure. Cause like, who knows what could go wrong? Yeah. Who knows what those medical bills could look like? What if you lose your job a month before you get birth? Now now it's a $20,000 medical expense versus like a $5,000 or $10,000, so it just all the bad scenarios run through your head. And like, that's just a testament to say like, even when you're financially prepared, like situations like this that are huge that come up, like it's still not easy to deal with. But I mean, just to say like, she's not pregnant. She was just asking.
All right.
So I was like, okay, we can continue down the home buying process. But no, I think you're right. Like the situation changes, like depending on where you're at with your finances. Cause like you had talked about, like if you're in debt and something's going to come up, like you got to push pause on that debt payoff plan. Or if you're in the process of saving up for a home and something big comes up, like you might have to backtrack a little bit on that plan to deal with the situation at hand. Like how do you gauge that level of knowing like, do I need to push pause on this to focus over here or can I kind of tackle both of these?
I think the biggest thing that I lean into and what I tell everybody, I have a lot of people, obviously you probably do too, the people that come to you with questions like this, like, should I do X, Y, or Z? The first thing that I always lean into is like, and this is so cliche, but like, what is your heart telling you? Like in your heart of hearts, are you nervous about this decision that you're thinking about? Or do you actually feel good about it and you just want someone to like, kind of like, be like, yes, this is what you should do. I lean with that a lot. When people ask, I just had a conversation with a friend asking me about like, should I buy this house? And this gave me all the numbers and stuff. And I was like, what are your thoughts about that? And they were obviously super kind of anxious about it because it was a little bit tight and they had a lot of things coming up and being able to afford that was contingent upon a few other things that they had going on. So, I think the biggest thing is like, how are you feeling about it? You know what I mean? Like, do you actually feel like this is a good idea? I think we always know like what we should do, but I think we get stuck in like, well, I should have a house. My child can't live in an apartment. You know what I mean? Like we get stuck in like the should haves of life and like things that we think we're supposed to have by a certain period of time. And I think we lean into more of that sometimes rather than like our own intuition. I don't know, Nick, maybe that's too woo woo, but I personally lean into that a lot.
Oh, no, I hear you. I feel like people definitely get stuck in like this is the way my life should be going and use that as justification to put themselves in a either less than ideal or even shitty situation, which it's just so hard. Cause like, I get it. You know, there's certain things that I'm like, oh, it should be this way. But like, I always got to remind myself, like, it just isn't, you know? And like, as much as that sucks and as much as I might want to complain about that, like, it's not going to change it, you know? And so I can put my efforts towards thinking about that and being upset about that, or trying to make progress towards getting to whatever I think it should be like, but the right way, you know, where I have enough money to do this or whatever it is. But yeah, the whole like tying up your emotions in what you think things should be like, it's such a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I've said this 1,000 times. I've told you this. Like we make our decisions a lot of times, especially big decisions like this, like homes and having babies and stuff, with like emotions rather than like logic, you know? And by the way, I actually messaged that person that was talking to me about like the housing situation. I messaged them and said, hey, what did you guys decide to do? You know, did you buy the house? Like what happened there? And they wrote back and said, you know, I wasn't feeling comfortable with it. And so we just decided we're not going to do it. If maybe it's on the market in another month or so, like maybe we will throw a lowball offer and see what happens. But so that was kind of like the point. Like they thought about it.
Yeah.
This would have been like, and they told me all these things, like this would be like the most perfect house and a lot of the emotional stuff to it, you know. But that aside, I could tell they were not comfortable with the numbers. And that's what they ultimately went with. Is like, nope, I wasn't feeling it right now. And that's kind of the way we went. I think, like I said, home buying, kids, we get really emotional. I also know a lot of people who, when they start to have kids, like they immediately have to go buy a new SUV. Your kid can't ride in a Honda Civic, or, you know,
yeah.
I don't know what it is. And, I don't know. I've also, this is completely side note, but I have been following so many SUVs and vans lately that have like those bumper stickers that say like baby in the car. I'm like, did you think I was going to like wreck into you if like you didn't have that sticker on your car? I already know that van probably has a baby inside of it. So anyway, but I'm just saying, like, we just like, I don't know what it is about homes and these big things that we get so emotional. But those are the things we should not be emotionally purchasing. Maybe emotionally purchase at like Target or something, but homes, babies, these are all things that should have pretty clear steps, and you should know what the right decision is.
Yeah. Having given it so much thought and run through every scenario, but the baby on board sticker, like every time I'm like, okay, like I don't want to crash into you.
Right.
Not necessarily. I mean, obviously I don't want to hurt your child, but like I also don't want to have to pay for the insurance on my car. Like this is going to mess my life. But I'm like, if the only reason to say baby on board, like in my mind, I'm like, if there's like some psycho who's on like a rampage or whatever, I'm like, they're going to see that and think, all right, now I can make someone's life even worse. You know, like, I don't know. I just feel like people are so wild with the types of stickers they put on there, even like beyond the babies on board, baby on board one. Like you see some wild bumper stickers, you know?
I've been seeing them so often. I mean, the only way I could justify that, Nick, you better not have one of those stickers, or I can't do this podcast with you anymore. But the only way they can justify that is if you're in an accident, maybe like someone sees there's a baby in there. I don't know. That's not what those are for. It's just like, I don't think that's what those are for, you know, but I don't know what those are for. Don't honk at me. Don't wake my kid. Don't bump into me. I don't know. But anyway.
Anyway, bringing it back from crazy bumper stickers, though, I guess to kind of like tie this episode together, you know, we've talked about like how to deal with these situations when they hit you, like in the moment. But I guess like almost like looking at the aftermath of it, like how you move forward. Like, let's say you either lost your job or your hours get cut, your pay gets cut or whatever. Like, how do you go from how you were living your life before, whatever that looked like, to transitioning into this like survival mode? Like, what do you need to prioritize in, whether it's in your budget or just the way that you're managing money to be able to stay afloat and then hopefully in the future start to get ahead again?
Yeah, this is a good question. And it's pretty relevant for a situation that you and I actually dealt with somebody. You know, this isn't just a small expense that you can just like, use money from your restaurant budget or whatever. This is like between like you like living on the streets and like having a roof over your head. So I really try to focus on like what's going to help you survive day to day. Like the first thing you need to prioritize is probably your rent, And what else? Food, utilities, your car payment, because obviously you're going to need a car to get to the job, things like that. Everything else is going to be like completely at the bottom of the list, whether it's your credit card payments, those can go away for right now. Everything else needs to take priority. Any other discretionary spending, I'm putting that all towards the end of the list. Anything that's going to help you survive, your food, all of your bills, all the utilities, like we just mentioned, those are the things you're going to want to prioritize first to help you survive and like actually keep a roof over your head.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer, because a lot of times people think like, I got to get all these things paid. And it's like, you do. But like, if you're in a situation where like you said, it's either living on the streets or having a roof over your head, like, yeah, getting the utilities, the rent, the food on the table, like that's going to be the most important things. And like, I usually tell people too, like get food on the table before anything else, especially if there's kids involved, because you can't do anything. I think like, what's the longest you can go without food? Like 3 days. Like now that's obviously like probably not going to be the case, because there's usually food pantries, you can go to churches or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. But like, I usually tell people like, hey, get food on the table before anything else in most cases. And this probably depends on the state you live in, but like, I would see that utilities get shut off before you get evicted, because evicting someone can sometimes be a longer process depending on where you live. But then for sure, the next thing to prioritize would be keeping that roof over your head, then your ability to get to and from work, right? Like I always tell people, like, those are your basic necessities. Like if we needed to cut to absolute bare bones, you should know what that number is. Like, how much do I absolutely need to have in my bank account to get through this month? Everything else, like, if you're in one of these dire situations, it not only can, but it like needs to take a back seat while you focus on just surviving. And then like, okay, so like, I guess the next question is like, where do you go from there? Like, what do you introduce next? Do you say it's okay, I should probably bring in the debt payment so I don't fall too far behind on that? Or is it like maybe other needs? Like, okay, like now I can bring back like my internet bill or my phone bill or something like that. Like where would you prioritize from there?
I mean, probably if you're going to need like your phone for like, I think you're going to need probably internet and your phone. I don't think you can live without a phone these days, but probably internet too, especially if you're applying for jobs and things like that. Depends what the debt is. If it's credit cards, I really don't care. Like those aren't the things I'm going to prioritize. But if it's like your car payment, like absolutely. What else would I prioritize? Student loans.
Maybe IRS debt.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Stuff like that. Student loans, I'm going to try to put them into like deferment, like a hardship deferral at this point. And same thing with your credit cards. Call them and tell them, I lost my job. I can't pay those right now. Like those are the things I'm not worried about. Like we need to put those aside. And I think I'm trying to think what else. Is there anything else? Is there anything else like big I'm missing, like as far as debts go?
I mean, if you have a car payment, as long as that's paid so they don't come and repo the car. Yeah. The only thing that can come to mind is like IRS debt, like tax debt. But even then, a lot of times if you call and you explain the situation, like more times than not, they want to get their money. And so they're going to be willing to work with you to make a plan where they still can get their money, even if that's extending the timeline. I think you kind of covered it. Yeah. I think you got to look at the debts and which ones are negotiable, which ones aren't, like, and in other terms, like which ones are secured debts, which are unsecured debts, is there what's the real impact to my life if I don't pay these versus some future impact of potentially they sue me, potentially they garnish my wages, which is a longer process. Right. Yeah.
And I also think the biggest thing is to like take action right away. Like if you do lose your job and you have like not much in your emergency fund, and you really just like feel like you're lost and things could really go to shit like soon. I think the biggest thing is obviously you got to jump in and start applying for unemployment. Like you mentioned, potentially going to food banks just so you're not going hungry, or, requesting some type of like government assistance as far as that goes. I think try to get all the help you can. Like you work so hard that you shouldn't feel bad if you have to take advantage of that for a little of time being, to help yourself get by. I don't think there's a problem with that at all.
I mean, in most cases, you're paying into it anyway. So,
right.
And that's what I think was so tough about that first situation is like that person had only worked at that job for a week. Like they really haven't paid into their unemployment benefits. Like it's going to be so hard for them to apply. Like definitely still try to let the people at the unemployment office determine if you're eligible or not. Yeah. But like, if you've been at a job for a while, you've probably like piled up those benefits a little bit to where you can at least help bridge the gap until you get through this situation, Yeah.
And so in order to, prepare yourself, this entire episode was all about these kind of financial emergencies. We talk about emergency funds all the time, but how can someone really set up their finances for like these worst case scenarios? we know that the emergency fund is there. Is there any other approach that you would take to this, especially someone starting over like this person in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, the first place I always tell people is like, you got to get really clear on all the numbers. Yeah. And we've talked about that. I think people know that. Like, you got to know what's coming in, what's going out, what do the debt situations look like. From there, that's how you're going to be able to build up an emergency fund. But like beyond that, all right, maybe you've built up an emergency fund. Like I had said earlier, like you want to add layers to your financial safety nets. You know, like, all right, if the situation gets bad, I can pull from the emergency fund. All right, if I deplete that and the situation's still going to shit, maybe I have a mortgage or I have to, pay for food for my child. Like, what's the next layer? It's like, all right, less than ideal, of course, but I could pull what I've contributed to my Roth IRA or something, right? Like I could take those funds out. You're kind of adding layers to it. And then also come to terms with the realization that like, no job is secure. Like we've seen that over the last 5 years, like no job is like safe anymore. No. Like funding can be cut at the federal level. Like your job could just decide to pivot. You may not be a crucial part to the team anymore. Like no one's like if you're only dependent on one source of income, like you're giving up so much exposure to put yourself in a bad situation. And that's not to say like you need to be working multiple jobs. It's just like, I think a conversation you got to have with yourself is like, all right, how can I pivot if I need to? Right? Like, okay, like maybe if I were to lose my job in this sector, it's probably because these other things are happening. Like, for example, the tech industry is laying off a whole lot of jobs. So if I lost my job here, what's the likelihood that I'm going to get another job in this industry? It might be lower, right? If a lot of people are losing their jobs there. So what could I pivot to? Right? Like, could I do something on my own in the meantime? Or do I have another set of skills that I could start applying for jobs using those set of skills? I think having like these backup plans for how you could expand your income, bring in other sources, I think that's going to be a huge part too, because you can't just be relying on one source, For
sure. But I also think, as we're talking about, what should people do to set up their finances in the future? I feel like the people that hit rock bottom like this and get really kind of scared, in these situations, like they're never going to be in this situation again because they're never going to want to feel those deep, dark emotions. So I feel like these are the people that really, life hit them hard and they had to have a really big learning lesson here. But these are the people that are really going to be set up for the future. So they don't have to deal with something like this again. So whether that's, starting to set emergency funds aside and, cutting back lifestyle once they do get a job back, I think that they're going to be set up well for the future just because they have that experience from the past.
All right, that wraps up today's episode. And, one simple ask, as always, if you found any value, if you got a good laugh out of Lauren talking about bumper stickers and all that, consider subscribing and share this with a friend, because that's going to be the best way you can help us grow.
And if you want to have your money question answered on the show, you can visit our website, justanothermoneypodcast.com, and click the submit a question button. And don't forget to join us for our next episode of Just Another Money Podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.